Marilyn Kay, employees at the Hampton Inn and Suites in Santa Ana, California, stumbled upon a revelation that would leave an entire city in shock. Inside a locked door of a simple third-floor hotel room were the bodies of two children, one 3-year-old Jalen and one 0-year-old Faith Edge. Their mother, 2-year-old Marilyn Kay Edge, had already disappeared. Born in 1971 and raised in the southeastern United States, Marilyn Edge seemed on the outside to be a caring mother, described as bright and accomplished. She held a degree in business and once worked as a financial consultant. But beneath that image was a woman unraveling emotionally unstable, trapped in constant legal turmoil, and ultimately consumed by a custody dispute that would spiral into unimaginable tragedy. For years, Marilyn and her ex-husband, Mark Edge, battled fiercely over custody of their children. Their divorce, finalized in 2007, ignited a chain of legal clashes stretching across multiple states. Their son, Jalen, diagnosed with autism, was often at the center of Marilyn's claims. She insisted that his condition made court-ordered visits with Mark harmful, yet Mark, a military veteran and contractor, maintained that he only wished to remain in his children's lives. In early September 2013, a Georgia judge ruled in favor of the father, awarding him permanent custody after years of delays and unproven accusations. Marilyn was ordered to surrender the children by Sunday, the 15th of September, but she never did. 3 days before the deadline, Marilyn took Jalen and Faith from Arizona to California under the guise of a family trip. Disneyland, the beach destinations any child might long for, but prosecutors would later argue it was all part of her calculated plan. On the morning of the 14th of September, Marilyn rammed her car into a power box outside a Home Depot in Costa Mesa. Police officers arrived to find her attempting to end her life using an electrical cord. She was pulled to safety, placed under suicide watch, and later admitted her children were already gone inside the hotel room. Investigators determined the method was poisoning. Though authorities never disclosed the exact substance, it was enough to bring charges, including special circumstance, murder by poison, and multiple counts. If convicted, Marilyn Edge faced either life imprisonment or the death penalty. Her initial court appearance was brief yet chilling. When asked if she wanted a delay in her arraignment, Marilyn repeated 3 times, "Only if you promise me the death penalty." Now in custody and undergoing psychiatric assessment, Edge awaits trial in Orange County. Prosecutors have not dismissed the possibility of capital punishment, though the final decision remains undecided. The father, Mark Edge, was blindsided. In a heartfelt message online, he wrote, "I walk away from the evil deeds of one and carry the grief of 3. The legacy of the case lies not only in sorrow, but in agonizing questions about custody battles, mental health, and the hidden collapse of someone once regarded as loving and reliable. In the end, 2 young lives were erased not by strangers, not by sudden rage, but by a mother's irreversible choice made in silence, far from courtrooms and far from mercy. Their story is now carved into the tragic history of crime, a reminder that the darkest betrayals sometimes come from the ones we are meant to trust the most. Deborah Denise. During the summer of 1984, a quiet yet sinister storm drifted across the Midwest, leaving a wake of confusion, fear, and irreparable grief. At its heart was a woman few ever suspected, Deborah Denise Brown. Born in 1962 Inches, Ohio, Deborah Brown was one of 11 children. Her childhood was marked by turbulence and hardship. She was assessed as developmentally delayed, with IQ results between 59 and 74. She had suffered head injuries in youth and lived with a dependent personality disorder, making her highly impressionable and desperate to please. Until she turned 21, she had no criminal past. But everything changed when she encountered Alton Coleman. Coleman, a hardened predator with a long history of sexual crimes, swiftly took control of Brown's life. Prosecutors later described their relationship as a disturbing master-slave bond. Together, they became one of the most destructive criminal duos in U.S. history. Over 2 months in 1984, Brown and Coleman launched a multi-state crime spree that spanned southern Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Kentucky, and Ohio. They left behind 8 murder victims, including children and elderly adults, along with numerous survivors who had been abducted, violated, or abandoned for dead. The majority of their victims were African American, chosen, prosecutors said, not for racial motives, but because the pair believed their actions would draw less suspicion in black neighborhoods. Their pattern was chilling. They gained trust through friendliness and familiarity, only to betray it in sudden, brutal attacks. Frequently, they stayed with their victims, using charm to lower defenses. Then, without warning, they struck. Strangulation with ligatures became their signature act. Among the most haunting cases was that of 7-year-old Tamika Turks. She and her niece encountered Brown and Coleman while returning from a candy shop. Tamika never made it home. That single act of cruelty, along with others, would ultimately seal Brown's fate in the courtroom. Following their arrest in Evanston, Illinois, on the 20th of July, 1984, just 3 days after Coleman was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, the justice system moved quickly. Prosecutors across several states coordinated to ensure punishment was carried out. In Ohio, Deborah Brown received a death sentence for her role in 2 murders, but in 1991, Governor Richard Celeste commuted her sentence, citing her cognitive limitations, her lack of criminal history prior to Coleman, and her total submission to his dominance. Still, she remains under a separate death sentence from Indiana. Today, Deborah Denise Brown is imprisoned at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. She has displayed little remorse, once sending a chilling note to a judge that read, "I killed the ___, and I don't give a damn. I had fun out of it." That one statement provides a disturbing window into the psyche of someone whose life may have been warped long before Coleman, but who became a willing partner in a reign of terror that still echoes decades later. Deborah Brown remains the only woman on Indiana's death row, her legacy tangled between psychological manipulation and conscious choice, standing as a stark reminder of how dangerous unchecked influence can become. Tiffany Hall. In the autumn of 2006, a quiet Illinois town was shattered by a crime so brutal it seemed beyond human imagination. At the heart of it stood a 4-year-old woman named Tiffany Hall. She was someone her victims knew well, familiar, trusted. Yet behind that mask was a woman unraveling in the most dangerous way. Tiffany Hall was born on the 23rd of March, 1982, and raised in East Street, Lewis, Illinois. She and Jamila Tunstall grew up together, both attending the same alternative schools. Jamila, just 23 and 7 months pregnant, often turned to Hall to watch her 3 young children. There was never a hint that her close friend would become her greatest threat. On the 15th of September, 2006, Tiffany Hall struck Jamila multiple times in the head, ending her life. Prosecutors later alleged that Hall then performed a calculated act, cutting Jamila's unborn child from her womb. The young mother bled to death inside a bathtub, her body later discarded in a nearby field. Hours afterward, Hall appeared in a local park, claiming she had just delivered a stillborn infant. She even carried the fetus with her, but her story quickly fell apart. She refused medical examination at the hospital, her explanations full of contradictions. The full scale of horror, however, would take days to come to light. 3 days after Jamila's death, Hall went back to the father of Jamila's children. Pretending to be sent on Jamila's behalf, she insisted she had come to collect the children and the car. Trusting her, he handed them over. It was the last time he saw them alive. Authorities believe Hall took the children back to the very home where Jamila had died. There, in the same bathroom, she drowned 7-year-old Demond, 2-year-old Ivan, and 1-year-old Janelle. Their small bodies were later discovered hidden inside the washer and dryer of their apartment. A week passed before the truth emerged. During the funeral for the fetus whom Hall had named and buried, she confessed to her boyfriend that the baby was not his. She admitted she had stolen it, admitted she had killed, a woman. Her boyfriend immediately alerted police. Hall was arrested the same day. What followed was disbelief mixed with grief. In court, investigators said she was cooperative but eerily detached. She had a recorded IQ in the mid-70 seconds and long-standing mental health struggles, but she was declared competent to stand trial. Facing execution, Tiffany Hall eventually entered a guilty plea to all 5 counts, 4 murders, and the intentional homicide of the unborn child. On the 9th of June, 2008, she was sentenced to life without parole. Today, Hall remains locked away in Illinois. The case is a chilling reminder of betrayal at its most personal, a babysitter, a friend, someone trusted, becoming the executioner. In the words of Jamila's mother, Sandra Myers, "I have to forgive her. Taking one life won't bring the others back." This tragedy is a sobering lesson that the worst crimes don't always emerge from strangers in the dark. Often, they come from the people closest to home. Killer, Marie Dean Arrington. Marie Dean Arrington isn't a household name in the annals of American crime, but in 1969, she became only the 2nd woman ever to appear on the FBI's infamous 10 Most Wanted list. Her tale is one of rage, revenge, and the perilous cost of unchecked fury. Born the 8th of August, 1933, in Florida, Arrington's life was scarred early by instability and violence. She wasn't destined to be a lifelong criminal by profession, but circumstance, impulse, and anger shaped her path. Known for her volatile temper and unshakable defiance, she became a living example of how thin the line between justice and vengeance can be. Her slide into infamy began in 1964 when she shot and killed her husband during a heated domestic dispute. Convicted of manslaughter, she received a 20-year sentence. But while she remained out on appeal, a darker obsession took hold revenge. 2 of her children had been convicted of crimes and sentenced to prison. Though their court-appointed defense attorney had only fulfilled his duty, Arrington focused her fury on him. Unable to reach him directly, she shifted her wrath to someone close to him. On the 22nd of April, 1968, 7-year-old Vivian Ritter, the secretary for the Public Defender's Office, suddenly vanished. Witnesses saw Arrington near the office that morning, later spotting her and Ritter driving off together in Ritter's car. Hours later, residents near an orange grove in Leesburg reported hearing gunfire. 5 days afterward, Ritter's body was discovered in a secluded field, riddled with bullets. Detectives quickly unraveled the case. Ballistic evidence tied the killing to a .22 caliber revolver once loaned to Arrington by her landlord. A search of her home unearthed Ritter's personal items, along with an unsigned letter threatening death unless specific inmates were released. Handwriting analysis and testimony pointed directly to Arrington. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. But the story didn't end there. In 1969, while awaiting execution at the Florida Correctional Institution, Arrington escaped. Clad only in pajamas, she cut through a screened window and slipped into the night. Her escape triggered a nationwide manhunt, and before long, her face joined the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, an extraordinary rarity for women at the time. For nearly 3 years, she evaded capture, living under aliases. Authorities finally tracked her down in New Orleans in 1971. For her escape, she was handed an additional 10-year sentence. Then, in 1972, the Florida Supreme Court struck down the death penalty, and her sentence was reduced to life in prison. Arrington remains incarcerated decades later, her name echoing quietly through criminal history. Her fury was personal, her decisions irreversible. Her story endures as a stark warning of how vengeance, when allowed to consume, can transform grief into something even more destructive than the original wound. Lolita Barthol. On the outside, Lolita Barthol appeared like any ordinary teenager 17 years old in her senior year at Tampa Bay Tech in Florida, just weeks away from her 18th birthday. But beneath that facade, a storm was already unraveling, one that would end with a man dead and a young woman condemned to spend the rest of her life behind prison walls. Born the 6th of September, 1977, in Tampa, Barthol's childhood was steeped in instability and harmful influences. Growing up in a troubled neighborhood, she gravitated toward peers who embraced crime as excitement, escape, or survival. By her late teens, she was fully entangled in the wrong crowd. On the 18th of August, 1995, Barthol and 2 friends targeted 6 4-year-old Richard Mendez, a floral supply salesman known for his kindness and steady routines. According to testimony from one of her co-defendants, the group had previously robbed elderly victims without resistance. But this time, something went wrong. They forced their way into Mendez's home. The older man resisted, reaching for a firearm. What followed remains disputed, but the outcome was irreversible. Mendez was shot dead. Prosecutors argued Barthol pulled the trigger herself. One accomplice, who secured a lighter sentence by testifying against her, claimed Barthol declared, "Don't nobody put their hands on me. I'm gonna smoke you." Barthol has always denied those words. She insists panic overtook her and that she doesn't even remember the moment she supposedly fired. Her arrest came weeks later, inside her high school principal's office. Charged with first-degree murder and armed robbery, she was tried as an adult despite being a juvenile at the time of the crime. On the 19th of December, 1996, she was convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. She was 19 when she entered Jefferson Correctional Institution near Tallahassee. The reality of her sentence didn't hit in the courtroom, but behind the razor wire. She found herself surrounded by women decades older, many who had also entered the system young and never left. Over time, Barthol learned to adapt. In interviews, she has described her strategy for survival, mentally detaching herself from the weight of her reality. "To me, I don't cope," she explained. "I just try to believe something totally different." Today, Lolita Barthol remains imprisoned in Florida. Her mother, Laura, still visits, holding on to hope and prayer for her daughter. Each Christmas, Lolita sends her mother a magazine clipping of a watch, a faint echo of the gifts she once gave when free. Her case continues to raise haunting questions about youth accountability and the justice system's handling of minors. Was she a cold-blooded killer or a terrified teenager who made an irreversible choice? The court saw her as dangerous. Others view her as a child frozen in time, sentenced to die in prison before adulthood had even begun. Somewhere inside those prison walls, that teenager has now grown into a woman, still waiting for time to move again. Antoinette Frank, the 4th of March, 1995, New Orleans. A family-run Vietnamese restaurant was alive with chatter, workers preparing dishes, and customers settling in for dinner. But when the door opened that night, death didn't creep in quietly, it marched in, disguised in the authority of a police uniform. This wasn't just a robbery, it was betrayal personified. A sworn protector of the law turned predator, raising her weapon against her own partner and against the very people who trusted her. All for greed. This is the story of Antoinette Frank, remembered as the most reviled officer in New Orleans history. Antoinette Renee Frank joined the New Orleans Police Department in 1993. At first glance, she seemed like a shining symbol of progress, young, ambitious, and one of only a few black women in the force. In a city long scarred by strained relationships between law enforcement and communities of color, her arrival was praised as a step forward. But beneath the uniform, colleagues saw warning signs. She was careless in her duties, often failed at the basics of policing, and most troubling of all, she had a fascination with the criminal world she was supposed to fight. Instead of distancing herself, she embraced it. Her entanglement was with Rogers Lacaze, and one 8-year-old drug dealer who had no business anywhere near a police precinct. Yet Frank gave him access. She let him ride in her patrol car, escorted him into off-limits areas, and even called him her partner. To veteran officers, it was unthinkable. One remarked later, "It was like watching a wolf being trained to guard the henhouse." By 1995, Frank was drowning, financially broken, debts piling, repossessions looming. Crime, not service, became her way out. Together with Lacaze, she devised a plan to rob a place she knew intimately, the Kim An Vietnamese restaurant. This wasn't a random choice. Frank moonlighted there as a security guard. The Vu family who owned it had welcomed her, fed her, trusted her like kin. They believed she was their shield. But on the night of the 4th of March, she arrived not as a protector, but as their executioner. Just before midnight, Frank unlocked the door and led Lacaze inside. He was masked, armed, and ready. Guns drawn, they stormed the restaurant. Off-duty officer Ronnie Williams, her fellow NOPD colleague, was working security that evening. He barely had a moment to process before Frank leveled her gun at him and fired. The bullet tore through his head, instant death. The Vu family was forced to the ground. They recognized Antoinette by name. This was the officer they trusted, the one who had shared meals with them. None of it mattered. Antoinette and Lacaze opened fire anyway. 17-year-old Ha Vu and her brother, 2 4-year-old Quang Vu, were executed mercilessly. Their sister, Van Vu, managed to hide, escaping by a thread. The aftermath was carnage. Blood smeared across the tiled floor, bodies motionless. A police officer had not only gunned down civilians she personally knew, but executed her own partner. It was a slaughter orchestrated from within the system itself. News of the crime spread like wildfire. New Orleans recoiled in shock. The NOPD already had a reputation for corruption, but this pierced deeper. This wasn't misconduct. This was betrayal with a badge. Detectives quickly pieced it together. Witnesses placed Frank and Lacaze at the scene. Ballistics tied the bullets to Frank's service weapon. Lacaze, reckless and arrogant, even bragged about the killings. At trial, prosecutors dismantled any facade she had left, describing her as manipulative, greedy, and cold-blooded. The robbery wasn't spontaneous, it was calculated, leveraging her insider knowledge of the restaurant's money and routines. The surviving Vu family members testified. One recalled through tears. She smiled while pointing the gun at us. She smiled. Those words haunted the courtroom. The jury needed little time. Both Frank and Lacaze were sentenced to death. In Louisiana, female death row inmates are exceedingly rare. Nearly 3 decades later, Frank still waits in that narrow corridor of condemned women, her appeals repeatedly denied. Her crime carved scars that never healed. She destroyed the Vu family, shattered the bond between the Vietnamese community and the police, and left her fellow officers disgraced by her betrayal. A uniform is meant to signify safety. Frank wore hers to unlock doors, to kill, and to leave bodies in her wake. She wasn't simply a corrupt cop, she was a predator in disguise, a wolf cloaked in authority, and her story endures as proof that sometimes the greatest threat doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. Dorothy Jean Vaillancourt. A mother's identity revealed decades after a mysterious death in California. Dorothy Jean Vaillancourt, born Dorothy Jean Williams on the 24th of August, 1917, in Hobart, Tasmania, lived a life spanning continents, wars, and generations only for it to end in mystery on a lonely hillside in Northern California. For nearly 60 years, she was known only as Marin County Jane Doe, buried nameless in an unmarked grave, her identity erased by time. But through breakthroughs in DNA analysis and the relentless determination of her daughter, Dorothy's story has finally re-emerged. During World War II, Dorothy worked as a nurse in Sydney, Australia. In 1943, she met and married Francis Arthur Bay Vaillancourt, a U.S. Marine resting after combat in Guadalcanal. Captivated by him and his dress whites, Dorothy followed her heart. In 1944, she boarded the SS Lurline, sailing toward a new existence in America. The couple first lived in Massachusetts, then moved to San Francisco, raising a large family. Dorothy gave birth to 7 children, including twins Penelope and Pamela. The family eventually settled in a Victorian home at 712 Steiner Street, one of the famed Painted Ladies of Alamo Square. Dorothy continued nursing at St. Joseph's Hospital near Buena Vista Park, while Francis worked as a painter. For a time, life was stable. Dorothy herself was intelligent, fluent in French, and well-versed in botany. But darkness crept in. On the 18th of December, 1959, a young woman named Susan Carew escaped a savage assault and, bloodied and terrified, pounded on the Vaillancourt door. Dorothy pulled her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, and phoned police, saving her life. That night marked a grim shift. In the following years, Dorothy's marriage crumbled. She turned to alcohol, her mental health declining. With Francis gone and Dorothy unable to care for them, the children were sent to Catholic orphanages. Penelope would later recall the abuse inside the Alberton Orphan Asylum in Ukiah. Branded incorrigible, they were transferred again. In 1964, Dorothy wed German immigrant Hermann Hesse. According to Penelope, Hesse was a violent man with a dark past. He allegedly displayed a photo of himself in a Nazi uniform, and records confirm his 1911 German birth. The family moved to Fairfax, Marin County. But peace was short-lived. At age 14, Penelope endured Hesse, punching her in the face and trying to strangle her. Her brother grabbed a gun, and police witnessed Hesse's attack, arresting him. The children were returned to their father, but Dorothy stayed with Hesse. By 1965, their Fairfax house was ordered sold to pay off debts. Shortly after, Dorothy disappeared. On the 18th of December, 1966, 15-year-old Arthur Munoz stumbled upon a decomposed body down an embankment near Paradise Drive in Tiburon. The woman wore a red cotton dress, a tan trench coat with plaid lining, and white slip-on shoes. A scarf was tucked into her pocket, a cigarette pack nearby, and a Westclox watch strapped to her wrist. Though badly decayed, she was described as 5'2", about 105 pounds, with reddish-brown hair and full upper dentures. A surgical wire near her eye suggested prior facial reconstruction. The coroner ruled she had been dead for months, likely since September. Despite fingerprints and bulletins, she was never identified. Some guessed she was a psychiatric patient, others a transient. Fireman Thomas Murphy recalled a woman fitting her description visiting Trestle Glen Station, asking to stay overnight. When denied, she asked for a car and walked toward Tiburon Boulevard. Her death remained unresolved. No broken bones, no clear trauma speculation swirled between accident, hypothermia, or foul play. Buried nameless at Mount Tamalpais Cemetery, she was forgotten. In 2022, Marin County reopened the file with help from the California DOJ and Othram Incorporated, a Texas forensic genealogy lab. Using advanced DNA sequencing and public crowdfunding through Project Justice, they built a genetic profile and traced relatives. On the 18th of December, 2024, 58 years after discovery, Penelope got the call. The Jane Doe from Tiburon was her mother. The revelation brought closure, but not peace. Visiting the spot, now part of Paradise Beach Park, Penelope was left with only questions. Did her mother slip and freeze in the cold? Was she struck by a car, or did Hesse play a part? With no evidence, the mystery remains. Dorothy Jean Vaillancourt's body was found the 18th of December, 1966, and as of April 2025, her case remains unsolved. Edwin Lee Sinclair Daniels. Edwin Lee Sinclair Daniels was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. In 1994, when he was just 12 years old, Edwin and his family relocated to Florida. Growing up, he discovered a passion for technology and eventually turned that passion into a profession, securing a job with Verizon to provide for his loved ones. By the time he was 35, Edwin was known as a devoted father, a man whose life revolved around his children. In 2002, he welcomed his first son with a woman he had been dating, though their relationship ended shortly afterward. Despite the breakup, Edwin remained a constant presence in his son's life, committed to fatherhood above all else. In 2007, he began dating LaToya Woodard, a Florida native with a complicated past. Woodard was the mother of 3 sons from a previous marriage and had served in the U.S. Navy before being discharged under accusations of desertion. She insisted she had been unable to secure proper child care while enlisted. Their relationship progressed quickly. Edwin and LaToya moved in together and had 2 daughters of their own. After nearly a decade, they married in 2016, moving into a new house in Deltona, Florida, north of Orlando. Along with them lived Woodard's friend, Crystal Lay. But within 2 years of their marriage, Edwin would be dead. On the 13th of April 2018, a frantic 911 call came from Crystal. Her voice trembled as she told the operator, "My roommate's been stabbed. I think somebody broke in. He's not moving at all. His wife is freaking out right now." When deputies arrived, they discovered Edwin's body stabbed dozens of times. His life ended in an explosion of violence. LaToya, hysterical, told investigators she had been asleep in the master bedroom when the killing took place. She claimed an intruder must have entered the home, but her story didn't hold up. The bed in the master bedroom was neatly made. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was missing from the house. The evidence suggested no robbery had taken place. Detectives searched the home and collected multiple knives. One stood out, a cheese knife found in the kitchen sink. At the hospital, Woodard gave her statement. She described her relationship with Edwin as normal, though she admitted arguments were frequent. On the day of the murder, she claimed she came home from work, asked Crystal to pick up the children, and then went to bed. Later, she said, she was awoken by noises and discovered Edwin stabbed. But Crystal's version of events did not match. She stated that LaToya didn't return home until around 7 p.m. After that, Crystal left for Walmart, and when she came back, she found LaToya crying over Edwin's body, telling her to call 911. Even more troubling, on the 911 call, Crystal had initially claimed she heard a commotion before leaving for Walmart. When pressed, she admitted Edwin had been alive when she left and that the couple was arguing. The contradictions were mounting. Edwin's autopsy revealed the ferocity of the assault, 34 stab wounds scattered across his head, face, tongue, throat, and abdomen. He also suffered a depressed skull fracture. The brutality of the killing was personal, and the wounds matched the cheese knife found in the sink. The investigation uncovered even more disturbing details. LaToya had been involved with a younger co-worker, 26-year-old Alan Roerson. Their relationship, documented through texts, showed intimacy and secrecy, even discussions about a miscarriage that Edwin never knew about. Investigators came to believe the affair fueled Edwin's murder. Alan's manager later reported that he had a breakdown at work the very day Edwin was killed, and LaToya was seen visiting him that afternoon. When questioned, Alan refused to speak without an attorney. His alibi placed him at home with family, but his defensive posture raised suspicions. Later, in September 2018, he was subpoenaed and offered immunity in exchange for testimony against LaToya, but his interview yielded little. His silence only reinforced the belief that he was covering for her. Despite Alan's reluctance, detectives felt they had enough to move forward. On the 15th of November, 2018, LaToya Woodard was arrested. Investigators soon discovered another damning detail. Edwin had a $100,000 life insurance policy through work. After his death, LaToya had attempted to claim the payout. This financial incentive became another powerful motive. Her trial was swift. On the 7th of February, 2020, the jury found her guilty of second-degree murder after deliberating less than 2 hours. By the 15th of July, 2020, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At just 37 years old, LaToya Woodard was transferred to the Homestead Correctional Institution for Women, where she remains today. Edwin, the devoted father and provider, was gone. and the betrayal by the woman he trusted most turned his life insurance into a death sentence. The knife wounds told the story of rage, the lies revealed premeditation, and the truth exposed a marriage poisoned by secrets. Karen Read. On the 29th of January, 2022, the quiet suburb of Canton, Massachusetts, became the epicenter of a scandal that still divides the state. In the early morning hours, as snow blanketed the ground and the temperature plummeted, a decorated Boston police officer named John O'Keefe was found lifeless in the snow outside a fellow officer's home. His girlfriend, Karen Read, would soon be accused of killing him, but this was no ordinary case. What unfolded was a firestorm of allegations, conspiracy claims, and accusations that the Boston Police Department itself had orchestrated a cover-up. Karen Read was not a stranger to law enforcement. A financial analyst by profession and a former officer herself, she was well respected. To the outside world, she and O'Keefe appeared to be a strong couple, but according to prosecutors, beneath the surface simmered tension. The night before his death, the couple had gone drinking. Around 12:30 a.m., they left a bar together. According to prosecutors, Read dropped O'Keefe off at a party hosted by another officer. Drunk, angry, and emotional, they alleged she struck him with her Lexus SUV as she sped off, leaving him bleeding in the snow. Hours later, O'Keefe's body was discovered. His clothes were soaked, his skin battered, and his body bore cuts, bruises, and even bite marks. The autopsy determined he died from hypothermia and blunt force trauma. To investigators, the answer was clear. Karen Read was responsible, but she told a very different story. Read claimed she was innocent, insisting she was being framed. Her defense argued that O'Keefe was beaten inside the house by other officers and dragged outside, abandoned in the snow to die. They suggested the damage to her vehicle was staged, the broken taillight fragments planted, and that police officers were protecting their own by making her the scapegoat. The courtroom battle became a war of narratives. Prosecutors leaned heavily on forensic evidence photographs of O'Keefe's injuries, fragments of taillight glass allegedly linked to her SUV, and claims that her behavior that night reflected drunken rage. They portrayed her as jealous, volatile, and reckless. The defense countered with allegations of corruption. They argued the investigation was sloppy, incomplete, and intentionally misleading. They pointed to inconsistencies in testimony, suggesting multiple officers had something to hide. They accused the Canton and Massachusetts State Police of shielding colleagues while throwing Read under the bus. Public opinion fractured. Social media lit up with debates, podcasts dissected every detail, and protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Some demanded Read's conviction, branding her a jealous killer. Others insisted she was innocent, a lone woman fighting against an institution willing to destroy her to protect itself. By the time the trial began in 2024, it had become less about one death and more about trust in the system. Every piece of evidence was dissected. O'Keefe's family demanded justice. Read's supporters claimed the trial itself was injustice. Signs appeared outside the courthouse. Justice for John and free Karen. The divide was absolute. In June 2024, after weeks of testimony, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict. 11 jurors voted to acquit, 1 voted guilty. The result, a mistrial. Karen Read walked out of court neither convicted nor cleared. Prosecutors quickly vowed to retry her, determined not to let the case collapse. As of today, she remains under the shadow of a murder charge. For her supporters, she is the victim of systemic corruption, scapegoated by the very police force her boyfriend served. To her detractors, she is a manipulative killer hiding behind conspiracy theories. John O'Keefe's death remains an undeniable tragedy. A respected officer, a mentor, a beloved man gone under mysterious, bitter circumstances. Karen Reed's story remains unresolved, her name forever, linked to betrayal, conspiracy, and the fragility of truth. The case has left one haunting question. Was John O'Keefe's death the result of a jealous rage, or was it the product of a blue wall built to protect its own? Yvonne Wu, the 13th of October, 2021, Brooklyn, New York. A crisp autumn night, broken by the sharp crack of gunfire echoing across 19th Avenue. Neighbors froze, some ducking for cover, others calling 911. When officers arrived, they didn't find a masked stranger fleeing. They found one of their own. NYPD officer Yvonne Wu stood calmly on the sidewalk, hands raised, her service weapon placed neatly aside. When asked what happened, she gave a chillingly simple answer: "I shot them both." Inside the home, 2 women lay on the floor. 24-year-old Jamie Liang was fatally wounded. Beside her, Jenny Lee Wu's former girlfriend was bleeding but still clinging to life. This wasn't random violence. It was an ambush born from heartbreak, jealousy, and obsession. On paper, Wu was the last person anyone expected to commit such a crime. A 7-year veteran assigned to the 72nd Precinct, she was described by colleagues as steady, disciplined, and reliable. She didn't fit the profile of a reckless cop. No explosive outbursts, no black marks in her file. But beneath her composed exterior, something corrosive had been festering. Wu had been in a long-term relationship with Jenny Lee, one she clung to with intensity. Friends said she was devoted, perhaps too devoted. When Lee ended things, Wu didn't just grieve, she spiraled. Obsession blurred the line between love and control, and when Lee began seeing Jamie Liang, Wu saw it as betrayal. On that October evening, Wu drove uninvited to Lee's home in Bensonhurst. Inside, Jenny and Jamie were spending what should have been an ordinary night together. But when Wu entered, fury took over. Prosecutors said she confronted them, anger rising to a breaking point. Then came the gun. A rapid burst of shots echoed. Neighbors recalled hearing 3, maybe 4 cracks. Jamie Liang was struck in the chest, collapsing almost instantly. Jenny Lee was hit multiple times but somehow managed to crawl toward the door, leaving a trail of blood behind her. Inside, chaos reigned, walls streaked in red, floors slick with it. Wu stood over the carnage in silence. Then, just as quickly, she stepped outside, placed her weapon down, and waited. There was no chase, no lies, no attempt to cover her actions, just that same cold admission: "I shot them both." For the NYPD, the case was devastating. A trusted officer had turned her training and her service weapon into tools of personal vengeance. This wasn't corruption or negligence. It was raw, unrestrained emotion weaponized. The trial painted Wu as a woman unable to let go, who viewed her ex's new relationship as humiliation too unbearable to endure. Her defense pointed to mental health struggles, but the facts were unshakable. Jamie Liang was dead. Jenny Lee barely survived, and Wu herself confessed at the scene. In June 2024, Wu pleaded guilty to manslaughter and attempted murder. A plea deal spared her a longer sentence, but not prison. By August, she was sentenced to 27 years. At age 33, that meant her youth, her career, and her life as a free woman were effectively over. The sentence stirred debate. Some argued it was too light, an officer should be held to harsher standards when abusing their authority. Others pointed to her mental state and spotless record as mitigating factors. But no sentence could undo the damage. One woman was gone forever, another carried scars that would never fully heal, and a community's faith in its protectors was shaken. Jenny Lee survived, but her survival came with pain few could imagine. She was forced to testify against a woman she once loved, to relive the night betrayal, and bullets tore her world apart. For Jamie Liang's family, there was no solace she had been taken not by a stranger, but by someone sworn to protect. Wu herself remained detached throughout the process, almost resigned. Perhaps she knew from the instant she pulled the trigger that her life was over, that her confession wasn't shock, but acceptance. Now, Wu sits behind bars, waiting out her sentence. By the time she sees freedom, decades will have passed. But outside those walls, her crime lives on as a grim lesson that obsession and jealousy can turn deadly in anyone's hands. And when that person wears a badge, the consequences can be catastrophic. Nomia Rosemary Ndlovu. Between 2012 and 2018, South Africa's streets carried a chilling secret. Behind the polished badge of Police Sergeant Nomia Rosemary Ndlovu lurked a predator who turned her own family into targets for profit. By day, she wore the uniform of the South African Police Service, sworn to uphold the law. By night, she was orchestrating cold-blooded murders, each killing meticulously planned, each victim chosen because their death could be converted into an insurance payout. Over 6 calculated years, she claimed the lives of 6 people she knew intimately. Relatives, a boyfriend, even children in her own family tree, all became stepping stones on her path of greed. Ndlovu's career began in 1994, at a time when South Africa was reshaping itself. Outwardly, she seemed a loyal officer, but fellow colleagues later described her as secretive, someone who never let others too close. What no one realized was that she was quietly securing life insurance policies for her loved ones, setting in motion a pattern of betrayal that would span years. The first life she took was that of her cousin, witness Madala Homu, in 2012. Homu was found bludgeoned to death near Olifantsfontein, left on the side of the road like another casualty of South Africa's violent crime statistics. Investigators saw nothing unusual until Ndlovu stepped forward to collect a payout. It was only the beginning. In 2013, her own sister Audrey suddenly died under mysterious circumstances. Though questions lingered, no one dared suspect a police officer of orchestrating her sibling's demise. Once again, Ndlovu cashed in. Her greed grew bolder. In 2015, her longtime partner, Maurice Mabasa, was ambushed and stabbed more than 80 times on his way home. The attack was savage, his body butchered beyond recognition, yet Ndlovu appeared disturbingly calm. Not long after, she claimed multiple insurance policies totaling over 400,000 rand. To the public, she wept. To herself, it was another payday. Her killing spree didn't stop. Over the following years, she eliminated her niece, her nephew, and children connected to her sister. Each death staged as if it were the product of South Africa's rampant crime wave. Each claim pocketed like a monthly salary. By 2018, she had collected the equivalent of tens of thousands of US dollars, all while still wearing the uniform of a police sergeant. But greed makes even the most careful killers reckless. Her final plan was the one that destroyed her. In 2018, Ndlovu decided her own elderly mother would be her next victim. She enlisted supposed hitmen, instructing them to burn down her mother's house with her still inside. What she didn't know was that the men she tried to recruit had turned informants. Instead of fire, they delivered evidence. Hidden recordings captured Ndlovu coldly discussing the details, how much she would pay, how the fire should start, and how she would benefit financially. When those tapes were played in court, they silenced the room. Her voice was flat, clinical, absent of compassion as she described how her own mother should be killed. The recordings became the final nail in her coffin. Her arrest sent shockwaves through South Africa. A police officer sworn to protect had been exposed as a predator in uniform, a serial murderer who used her badge as camouflage. The media branded her the insurance killer. The public demanded answers. How had she concealed such a bloody trail for so long? In 2021, her trial unfolded like a national drama. Families of the dead sat only feet away from her, staring at the woman who had destroyed their lives. Prosecutors presented a devastating case insurance papers in her handwriting, bank deposits that lined up with each killing, testimony from the informants she hired to kill her mother, and forensic links to her victims' deaths. Her defense insisted she was innocent, claiming she had no control over the tragic losses in her family. But witness after witness exposed her lies. Investigators described her cold detachment, her greed, her careful manipulation of policies and payouts. One officer stated bluntly, she treated human beings like numbers in a ledger. On the 22nd of October, 2021, the verdict was read. Nomia Rosemary Ndlovu was convicted of 6 murders, attempted murder, fraud, and obstruction of justice. On the 5th of November, she was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms plus additional years for fraud. She showed no visible remorse. Today, she sits behind prison walls, stripped of her badge, destined never to walk free again. Her story stands as one of the darkest betrayals in South African history, not just because she killed, but because she used the very symbol of justice to conceal her crimes. To the victims' families, the pain is eternal. Their loved ones weren't stolen by random killers. They were betrayed by blood, targeted for cash, erased by someone who was supposed to protect them. Nomia Rosemary Ndlovu turned the honor of the badge into a mask, and behind it, she hid a monstrous truth. She was not an officer of the law. She was a serial murderer, willing to sacrifice even her own family on the altar of money.